morning, Westwinds. Let's stand and sing together about what Jesus has done for us this morning. The King of all creation set aside his crown, a servant to the Father's love, descended from the throne above, author of salvation, giver of new life, crucified to pay for sin. Our righteousness is in the name of Jesus. Every heart and tongue confess your name above all names. All things, hey, of this earth belong to you forever. You will reign. God of resurrection, conqueror of death, ruler over everything, Lord of lords and King of kings is Jesus. Every heart and tongue confess your name above all names. All things of this earth belong to you forever. You will reign. Highly exalted is the name of Jesus Christ. Heaven and earth declare all praise to Jesus Christ. Highly exalted is the name of Jesus Christ. Heaven and earth declare all praise to Jesus. Ha! Every heart and tongue confess your name above all names. All things of this earth belong to you forever. You will reign, Jesus. Every heart and tongue confess your name above all names. All things of this earth belong to you forever. You will reign, reign. Hey! Highly exalted is the name of Jesus Christ. Heaven and earth declare all praise to Jesus Christ. All right, good morning. Awesome. We are so glad you're here with us today, both in the room together and online if you're watching from afar. We are so happy about today, especially because you may have noticed the little hot tub we got going on in the center of the stage here. That's because we have a baptism today. That's something to be excited about. Yeah? Awesome. So that's going to happen here pretty soon, but we're actually going to keep on singing. I did want to point your attention real quick, though, to some things on the screen. There is a QR code that gives you some next steps for how you can get involved and plugged in at Westwinds. If you've been here for a little while and you're just wondering, what could I do? What's the next step I can take in my relationship with God and my relationship with this community and how I can get involved? That QR code is your ticket, your golden ticket to find that information. So if that's something that you're looking for, that's a great way to get a hold of that. But let's go ahead and keep on standing and keep on singing together. It's going to be a good morning. All right. No matter the way I stumble down this road, and from dawn until sundown, you carry me tightly and take away this load. Could I ever run away from the love you showed me? I feel it in my bones. If I'm falling down below, would you catch me gently and save me from these stones? And when I hit this wall, and you pick me up and you never let me fall. Hey, you are right, you are right, and I'm covered in your grace for all my days. So you are right, you are right, you covered in your grace for all my days.
Every once in a while in life, we get to experience something that is old, but is brand new every day. Something that is ancient and something that is as new as tomorrow. In our tradition, in 2,000 years of Christianity, we call that baptism. It's a step people take to say, I am giving my life to Christ. And as we used to say, down through the centuries, we are baptized into Christ. The cool thing about that, when we're baptized into Christ, we are the body of Christ. We're also baptized into one another. And that's a pretty exciting thing to think about. Today we're going to celebrate Cooper Johnston's baptism, and when Cooper comes up out of the water, it's okay to cheer because we celebrate baptisms. And we want you to know that we think this is so important. We want everyone to consider that next step. Our baptistry is going to stay up here for the next several weeks, and if you want to get baptized at any time, you could just say, hey, I'd like to get baptized next Sunday or the next Sunday. We could make that happen. So if you want anything to know about that next step, the QR code will help you, but also after the service, the fountain in the lobby, there'll be somebody back there that can answer any of your questions about baptism. But this step is a huge step for Cooper and for all of us as we remember all that Christ has done for us.
All right, let's sing Heaven Thundered. Heaven thundered, and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you formed. Faith commanded, and the mountains are moved. Fear is losing ground to our hope in you. Unstoppable, unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Hey! The freedom conquered, all our chains under. Sin defeated, Jesus is overcome. Mercy triumphed when the third day dawned. Darkness was denied when the storm was gone. Hey! Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Hey. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Hey! Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Whoa. In the light of your love, so pure and so clear, there's nothing I want and nothing to fear. You tell me that I'm free as a child and I've nothing to fear. In the light of your love, in the light of your love, my heart is your home, never abandoned, never alone. You tell me I'm yours, I'm shielded and sure. My heart is your home. In the light of your love, your love. And I wanna live in wild abandon. And I wanna know the heart of heaven. And I wanna see with eyes from above. In light, oh in light. Open up my eyes, will you open? light of your love, your love, in the light of your love, your love.
You can go ahead and grab a seat. Man, I don't know if anyone else is like this. I still tear up every time someone gets baptized. So if I'm a little extra emotional today, it's Cooper's fault, okay? So is he up here somewhere? There he is. So listen, this is a bit of an odd Sunday. So we've been outside for the last few months. And then next week, we're starting this series. It's actually going to carry us all the way to Advent. And so this Sunday is it's like a gap Sunday. It kind of sits in the middle. We're like mid-set construction, and there's all kinds of things going on. And as I was thinking about like what do you talk about on a gap Sunday? I wanted to talk about something. I want to invite us into maybe a message that is centering, something that feels like core, at the core of what it is to be a Jesus follower. And I wanted to actually do that looking at a passage of scripture that if you've been around the church for any amount of time, maybe you've heard these stories before. It's a time in the book of Luke where Jesus tells 3 stories in a row that all have very similar themes. You know, Jesus, he liked to use story to center people. He liked to use stories to call people in. And I think that's important because we live in a culture, and I think Jesus existed in a culture all about calling people out. But Jesus used stories to call people in. Jesus' style of leadership, his methods of calling people to mission was inviting them in towards the center, in towards himself and what was happening, rather than building fences to push people out. So as we listen to stories of Jesus, we want to pay attention to who's hearing the story. And so we're actually going to look in Luke chapter 15. And this part, before Jesus tells the story, the author of the book, Luke, lets you know who Jesus is talking to. Let's check this out. Luke chapter 15 opens up this way. It says, all the tax collectors and sinners were gathered around Jesus to listen to him. But the Pharisees and the legal experts were grumbling, saying, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So I want to kind of set the scene here a little bit. So Jesus is kind of gathered around, and this was a time like churches didn't have sound systems, pastors didn't walk around with microphones on their faces, okay? Jesus would have been just kind of like in crowds, and people wanted to kind of hang around because things happen. Like when Jesus was around, people would get healed. Or like all this food would show up from nowhere, kind of like being around Westwinds, right? And so people just kind of wanted to hang around. But then Jesus would start talking about stuff. Maybe someone would ask him a question, and then people would start to gather. But the people who most wanted to be around Jesus were people that the religious folks talked about as sinners and tax collectors. So who were these people? Well, the tax collectors, these were folks that were pretty far from their community. So at this time, Jewish people were under Roman occupation. And the tax collectors, many of them were Jewish folks who decided they were going to work for Rome and collect taxes from their families and friends. How do you think, how popular do you think these folks were, huh? Not overly popular, right? So they were really pushed out from their community, many times considered traitors. And the things that were said to them were probably things that we would not repeat this morning because there's kids in the room. Kids, how we doing? Yeah, good, all right. The other people around the table were described as sinners. Now, I want to be careful here because this word sinners has cultural implication now, but this story is talking really specifically. This word sinners refers to Jewish people who walked away from Jewish customs. So for some reason, they were not following all of the religious rules, and so the people that were following all the rules referred to this group as sinners. And so Jesus is sitting around talking to tax collectors and sinners. Now the Pharisees, they take issue with this. The Pharisees, this was a sect of Judaism that had this view of the world that everything was either good or evil. And they had this view of the afterlife that when you die, you're either going to pay for the evil you did, or you're going to be rewarded for the good that you do. This was their perspective on life. And so Pharisees in the scriptures are often noted as kind of like showing off their good deeds. Because in that mindset, showing off your good deeds would give you some social capital, right? If everyone is going to be rewarded for their good, if you have the capacity to do more good in this real dualistic kind of thinking, to do good would invite you into more social capital. Now, the legal experts, this is the other group that don't like who Jesus is hanging out with. These sometimes in the scriptures are referred to as scribes. So scribes were really intellectual individuals. They really understood like the Jewish law. Have you ever read the parts of the Bible that are just like tedious, okay? Like they would read these parts of the scriptures, and if something came up like that was kind of like in the gray area, like, what's the right thing to do here? What does the book say about this? The scribes were the ones that would get called upon to figure it out, right? They lived in the weeds. They were, splitting hairs, right? This was their job. And so as Jesus is hanging with the scribes and Pharisees, as Jesus is hanging with the tax collectors and sinners, the scribes and Pharisees are kind of standing at a distance, arms folded, judging this man who's hanging out with people that they consider to be unclean. So Jesus starts to tell these stories. And if you're paying attention, and I'd encourage you today to pay attention. If you're paying attention, in these stories you can wonder, I wonder who Jesus is talking to. Is he talking to the sinners and tax collectors? Or is he talking to the scribes and the Pharisees? I'm going to actually start with the third story. The third story that Jesus tells is maybe the most famous of the three. It's the story of a father who has two sons. And as the story goes, this father has this great big farm, lots of family wealth has been built up over the years. And the younger son comes to the dad and says, "Dad, I'd like my inheritance. I'd like my half. And I'd like to just take it and leave." Now, if you were the scribes and Pharisees hearing this part of the story, you'd lean in a little bit. Because this was rude. It was not proper. It was not right for a son to go to their father and say, "I want this now." You're not supposed to have the inheritance until your father has passed. And so what this son is saying to the father is, "I wish you were dead. I want your stuff. I want my half. I love what you can give for me, but I no longer want to be with you. I want to take my stuff." The scribes and Pharisees were like, As the story goes, the son takes his stuff, and he goes into far-off lands. We don't know where, it's just a story. And he spends all the money. He parties, and he lives in ways that good Jewish people, definitely not from the line of Pharisees, should live. And as he's spending all this and living lavishly, the scribes and the Pharisees are like, what a sinner. And the story says that eventually the son hits a point where he runs out of money. And he has nothing. He's spent it all. And as he's eating slop, like he's eating the food that pigs are eating, he's stealing from pigs on a nearby farm. And can I say, the scribes and Pharisees at this moment would have been like, pigs were considered unclean. You did not go near pigs. And this boy is so low that he's eating the food and stealing the food from the pigs. And the son thinks to himself, even my father's employees are treated better than this. Maybe my dad would just let me work on the farm. And so he starts his walk back home, his long walk back home. And the scripture says that the father saw him from a long way off. He lifts up his robe and begins running towards the son. Again, the scribes and the Pharisees are shocked. See, the head of a household, the top of the hierarchy, should not dishonor themselves to run towards a wayward son. The right move would have been for the father to stand there and wait for his son to go the distance. But in this story, he runs to his son and doesn't go there and scold him. Actually, he embraces his son and says to his employees, grab the family ring, grab my best coat, put it on my son, for my son who is gone has returned. We're throwing a party. Kill the best cow we have. We're having steaks tonight, not just any steaks, but the best ones we can make. This party is going to be amazing. And so they're throwing this party, and they're partying as a family. But then there's the other son. Dad's looking around and says, where's the other son? He looks out the window, and the other son is out. I imagine him like out on the porch, arms folded. The dad goes out of the house. He's like, son, what's going on? The older son's, where's my party? I've been here the whole time. I've been working here the whole time. I've been doing all the things. Why are we having a party for him? We should be having a party for me. And the dad says, son, you don't get it. My son's home. My kid's back. Why don't you come in? Why don't you come in too and party with us as well? How do you think the Pharisees heard this? Who do you think the scribes connect with in the story? Jesus is inviting both sons into the house. He's inviting them both in. See, I think what's difficult about this story, or perhaps what invites us into the story, is that both sons have a construct of the way dad operates, the way dad runs the family, that is incorrect. So they both have the construct that you should get what you earn, that you should get what's coming to you. Neither of them have a construct of grace. And I think this is relevant because I think even in this room, if I could speak to some of us that maybe grew up in the church, some of us were sold the construct of church. Some of us grew up in situations where there was rules that if you break them, you're not coming back. Some of us grew up in a really similar construct, and we can imagine all the people in our lives that if they knew that I would look at me the wrong way if I ever came back and stepped back in. Can I just say that sinning against a religion does not equal sinning against God? You might break the rules of church. You might break the rules of what's acceptable in your family. You might break the rules of what so-and-so thinks a Christian is. That does not equal how God feels about you. Sinning against God is not the same as sinning against religion. Religion does not set God's terms for coming home. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. I think this is also hard for the brother outside. See, the brother outside was a part of building the construct. He ran the family. He ran the family while the younger brother was gone. He was the older son making all the rules for the employees. It's really hard to admit when we've been a part of the group that's been building the construct for all these years and God starts to do something different. That's a really challenging place to be in. I resonate there. I mean, I grew up in the church since about 7th grade. I've been in the church. And from that point, I did all the right things. I mean, I led worship in middle school and high school. I preached my first sermon when I was 17 years old. I went off to Bible college and paid a lot of money to learn about this book and learn how to lead the church. I mean, I've given my life to this thing based on constructs that have been taught to me. But time and time and time again, God continues to move outside of the box that I put him in. And sometimes I notice, and sometimes that construct keeps me from noticing. I'm probably more akin to the scribes and Pharisees in this story than I am to the brother who left. Jesus goes on to tell another story, story number 2. He tells this story of this woman who is in her house and she realizes she's lost a coin that's really important to her. And the story says that she sweeps the whole house. I mean, she cleans everything, turns everything upside down, looks to every nick and cranny through that house until she finds the coin. And this is how Jesus ends that story. He says, I tell you, joy breaks out in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who changes both their heart and life. And then Jesus tells the story about a shepherd who has 100 sheep, and one day he's going, 97, 98, 99. I gotta try it again. These sheep are all the same color. Let's try this again. 1, 2, and he checks over and over again, and there's only 99. He's like, I'm missing one of these sheep. And the story goes that the shepherd leaves the 99, making them susceptible to attacks from other shepherds who might steal his sheep, making them susceptible to predators who might come and eat these sheep. He leaves the 99 and goes out and searches for the one to bring the one home. And this is how that story ends. He says, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who changes both their heart and life than over 99 righteous people who have no need to change their hearts and their lives. You know how important this language became in the early church? Peter, the leader of the first church, in his first sermon, like all this chaos is happening in the book of Acts, Peter gets up and preaches the first sermon. It's very long. Someone fell asleep. But at the end of it, people are like, all right, Peter, you've got some good points. What should we do? You know what Peter says? Change your heart and change your life and be baptized. And what do you talk about on a Gap Sunday? How about a couple stories that Jesus told that reminds us of the kind of people we are? That people like us do things like this. Seek out the one. Make room for those that maybe have been pushed out of society. Make room for those who are astray and wanting to come back. We are the kinds of people who throw parties. But this story is actually, it's not about the kids. It's about the dad. It's a reminder of the kind of God that we are building our lives around. That what we think God should value is not always what God values. And that the party that God throws celebrates and invites everyone and anyone who decides who would like to change their heart and their life. Like that's the entrance. Do you want to live a life that continually changes in your inside and outside to become more of the person God has called you created to be? If you would like to do that, you're in. That's it. You're in. Yeah, but what about this thing? They got to stop doing that first. No, they don't. What about this belief they hold? They got to believe this. No, they don't. That's not what these stories are about. That the church is a kind of place that flings the doors open and says, come exactly as you are. We won't try to change you. Actually, we believe the presence of God will change you. We'll let God navigate the weeds. We don't have to do that work. That's the work of the Father. You know what this dad knows? That what's actually going to transform his younger son is belonging. Sure, this younger son screwed up. Yes, this younger son probably has some things in his life that led him to treat his dad that way. Absolutely, he does. But the father is not standing on the porch getting a list. Did you go to counseling yet? Because you can't come in yet. Did you get this figured out? Because you can't come in yet. Actually, we're going to sign an agreement before you come into the house that you're never going to do these things again. The Father knows that the most powerful, transformational thing in the world is love. It's belonging. It's invitation. And to the Pharisees standing around watching Jesus, that he eats with tax collectors and sinners, Jesus goes, I know. You want to come? Come sit. This is what we're doing. You don't have to come. But if you want to be a part of it, this is what we're doing. This radical invitation of Jesus is for everyone. And this becomes so important to the early church. Because in a second after this story, Jesus is going to go be with his disciples. One of the disciples, Simon, was a zealot. You know a zealot? A zealot is like a Pharisee. So the Pharisees hold this view of good and evil. And they would religiously live this out. Zealots would live this out in a military fashion. If they thought you were evil, they'd try to kill you. They'd try to capture you. They'd try to imprison you. You're one of those guys sitting at the table. Matthew, another one of the disciples, was a tax collector. He's sitting at the table. And then there's these like Jewish fishermen sitting around the table who have been kept at bay by tax collectors and zealots most of their life. And Jesus is about to go sit at this table and say, y'all are going to work together to start the church here in a few weeks. You're going to have to figure out what I'm all about. This whole thing is centered in love. Jesus was always doing stuff like this. In this time, there was this disease called leprosy, and people thought to have leprosy was because you had some kind of evil or sin in your life. It'd literally eat the skin off your body, and lepers were forced to live outside the city. It was illegal for them to come near people, and you were not supposed to touch lepers. Do you know what Jesus was doing? He was touching them. He was touching them. There was a woman who was caught in adultery, and for a woman to be caught in adultery meant she needed to be brought to the middle of the city and be stoned and be made an example of what will happen to you if people find out about your sexual impurities. You know what Jesus did? He honored her. He honored her. He protected her. Jesus tells a story about a Samaritan who goes along and helps someone out of the ditch after two religious people just walked by. You know who the Samaritans were? They were considered evil. They were half Jewish. They were ones who broke the law and intermarried and broke the line. They were considered unclean. They were the enemies of Pharisees. Jesus makes an example of the Samaritan. He honors the Samaritan. Some people in the church treat kids like a distraction, something we got to shove them into a room while the adults do the real thing. This was going on in Jesus' day too. The disciples are trying to keep kids away from Jesus. And Jesus says, no, the kids aren't a distraction. They're who we learn from. They get things about me that nobody else gets about me. Some of you need to learn a lot from kids. You should sign up to be in the kids ministry. In his last days, Jesus is sitting with his disciples, and the author of the book of John makes it very clear that everybody knows, the reader knows, Jesus knows that Judas has already put things in place to betray him. And John makes sure the reader understands that Jesus offers Judas the cup and the bread, inviting him into communion. And on the cross, there's this thief next to him who is supposed to die and be killed for the things that he's done, and Jesus gives him life. Jesus was always acting outside of the box, the construct that everybody else had for the church and had for religion. And so the point of all this is, for any reason you're isolated from God or your community, Jesus is saying that's unnecessary. That's unnecessary. You can come here. You can party with us. There's no kids table. There's no rich table. There's no VIP room or first class section. There's just one table. There's just one party. Or as Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, you are one body and one spirit, and just as God has called you in one hope, there is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, and one God, and one Father of all, who is over all, through all, and in all. One party. So to the curious observer here, you're like, I don't know how I got here today. Someone brought me here. What about this church? Because, we live in a place where everybody knows about, there's a lot of churches in Jackson. Did you know that? So I want to talk a little bit about our church just for a second. This is what this looks like for us. We just came out of a series of teachings talking about prayer. One of the things we want to do with prayer in our community is remove barriers of prayer. We want to remove barriers for people to communicate God and commune with God, not build them. We will develop a practice of prayer that expands our imagination and expands our optimism about what God can do in the life, not closes us off and makes us more fearful. Table, another common practice in the church. Communion, Eucharist. At this church, we practice what's called a wide open table, which means if you want to come, Jesus would love to have you. We will not keep anybody who wants to come to the table and receive the bread and wine of Jesus away. But more than that, we're going to invite each other to do the same thing in our own lives. Some of you were here last fall where we did something called tables. Maybe you remember this. I was the new pastor here, and I asked people to sign up for tables without knowing who else was going to be in the table with you. I asked people to go into other people's homes and have meals with them, with people they didn't know and didn't know if they would like them or not. You know what was amazing? Over 70 people signed up to do this experiment. And you know what's also been amazing? Is I'm still hearing stories today, a year later, of relationships that were forged in those moments that have created connection and community and belonging among us. That's the power of this stuff. Baptism. You know, some traditions, and I could sit with you and explain why these different traditions do baptism different ways. Please don't hear me, how do I say this without swearing? Poo-pooing on those traditions. But at this church, the way we're going to honor this and practice baptism, I think Jesus' words and Peter's words are enough of a line. If you would like to change your heart and change your life in the way of Jesus, we'll baptize you. If you want to change your heart and change your life in the way of Jesus, we'll baptize you. And then a bunch of people will cheer and celebrate because we all are in the same process with you. Our hearts and lives are changing. We're continually learning how to center Jesus in our life. We're continually taking more and more steps towards the way of Jesus. And then I want to talk about the Bible. In this church, we will go great lengths to wrestle with the text through the life and teachings of Jesus. If something we read doesn't sound like Jesus, we either need to get to know Jesus some more or dig deeper into what actually is being said here. And so it will be a rare occasion. I don't want to make a rule or a law or a decree, but it will be a rare occasion that we don't look at Jesus when trying to understand what the Bible says. That might sound like, oh yeah, of course that's what you do. That's not what everyone does. And so with that, I have a few announcements, okay? The waters of baptism. Normally we kind of bring this tank out. It's kind of a hard tank to get out. So we bring it out like a few times a year and baptize a bunch of people. But for the next, let's say, 8, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, we'll see how long it goes, we're going to try and remove the barriers of baptism. So if you want to get baptized, we'll baptize you next week. If you don't want to wait any longer, just interrupt me. I'll baptize you right now. But if you want to get baptized, we'll baptize you. I don't think you should have to wait for that. The way this tradition started was literally just people standing on a hill, and then John the Baptist was like, all right, anybody want to change their heart and their life? Come on. And they just came. There was no class. There was no sign-up. There was no doctrine. There was no catechism. It was just like, if you want to change your life and heart in the way of Jesus, come get baptized. We're going to practice it the same way. Tables. We're going to go through another round of tables, okay? And we need hosts. So you're going to start hearing us talking about signing up for tables in the next few weeks. Right now, I'm saying if you want to be a part of the group of people that open up a table to maybe some people you don't know, people you don't like, okay? I want to invite you to do that. We need hosts. Come talk to us. The last thing is I want to talk, second last thing, not the last thing. I want to talk about kids for a second. After this gathering today, our kids area is open for an open house. Next week, we are going full launch with kids. Both services, 9:30 and 11, we'll have kids at both services. Okay, so bring your kids, bring your neighbors. But that's our responsibility to make happen. We don't have enough adults right now. And there are some adults in our community who are carrying more than they should and more than they need to, because there's other adults in our community that I know, the Holy Spirit's like tapping on your heart and you'd be like, I don't want to. Today's the day to go, okay. Right? So go over to the kids area, and if you're just kind of wondering if this is a spot for you, walk through the kids area and maybe just invite God to speak to you. Walk into all the rooms. Is this the room I'm supposed to be in once a month? Nope. Okay. Is this the room I'm supposed to be in once a month? Hey, Kiki, what age, how tall are the kids in this room? All right, like, those are all the things you can figure out. If you're here with the kid today, I'd encourage you to bring your child through the open house. Show them the room they're going to be in. Help them get comfortable. So you're going to walk out of here in a minute. You're going to check all that. The last thing is our community has what some churches call members or owners. Here we're calling it our centering community because I want it to be active. I want it to be practice-based. This community formed about 1 year ago now. And we've been developing and growing and figuring out what it means to center our community. Today, we're going to have a centering community meeting that is open. If you'd like to come and see what that's all about, what it might look like to be part of the party throwers, Be part of the welcome home party at our church. Be the kind of people who bake the cake, light the candle, and cheer when they blow it out. That's the group of people that we're gathering in this room in 40 minutes, okay? So the service is going to end. You're going to walk out, and about 20 minutes after that, you can come back in. There's a charcuterie set up on the way out. I set that up to kind of, so this would be kind of like a timeshare where you gotta go to the meeting and get the food, okay? And so you're going to see it on the way out. You're going to notice how good that looks. You're going to have to come back and listen to me try to sell Centering Community if you want to eat some of that food, okay? So take a look on the way out and think, I don't know about Centering Community, but I'd like to eat those strawberries. Look really good. That cheese looks good. Because it is really good. It is really awesome. You have to come back. Okay, you got it? So there's a lot going on because it's the fall. So hang on to your seats. Get it all figured out. Check out the kids area. Shake some hands. Kiss some babies. And then come back here. We're going to talk about what it means to center this community. Let's sing another song. Let's love people well, church. Here we go.
And I've been looking for signs in all the wrong places, in all the wrong places. And I've wandered the night in all of these mazes, in all of these mazes. You can tell by the way that I talk, you can tell by the way that I walk. Oh, I've been here for a little too long. I've been here for a little long. You can tell by the way that I stare. You can tell by the way that I am. Oh, I've been feeling like a broken man. I've been feeling how you love. Take me back to where we started and don't give up on me. No, don't give up. Come on, higher love. Lead me back to where my heart is and don't give up on me, on me. Hey! Losing the light in all of these spaces, in all of these spaces. And I've been trying, but I'm losing my patience, hey, losing my patience. You can tell by the way that I talk, you can tell by the way that I walk. Oh, I've been here for a little too long. I've been here for a little long. You can tell by the way that I stand. You can tell by the way that I am. Oh, I've been feeling like a broken man. I've been feeling I love. Take me back to where we started. Don't give up. Back to where my heart is and don't give up on me, on me. Hey! Broken, it won't leave me when I fall. Oh, your love is sweet devotion, it will wait for when I call. All I need is just a moment, 'cause I'm doing the best I can. Oh, I know it's time to come back home and come back to who I am. How you love, take me back to where we started. Don't on high you love, lead me back. Awesome. So just a reminder for you, Centering Community Meeting is going to be just in a few minutes here at 11:30. We also have some refreshments back there, apparently, which I did not know about until Cory just mentioned it. That's awesome. So have a great week, everybody. We look forward to seeing you stick around. Check out the kids' ministry. Stay for Centering Community if you want to. We'll see you next time.